Before I even attempt to talk about healing after narcissistic abuse, we need to understand the impact of going through such experience. We need to understand how it affects our brain, body, and soul. Hi, my name is Danish, and I'm a narcissistic abuse recovery professional. And today, in this episode, I'll be talking about what happens to you after going through narcissistic abuse. If you're watching this video on YouTube, make sure that you subscribe to the channel by pressing the subscribe button and push the bell icon to stay updated with every latest episode that I post here. If you're watching this video or on different channels, make sure to subscribe and follow as well. And if you're listening to this podcast on a podcast channel, make sure that you follow and subscribe there as well. So let's get started. In my opinion and my experience, going through narcissistic abuse is the most devastating experience that a person can ever go through in their life, because it casts its shadow on each and every aspect of our life, such as physical, emotional, psychological, biochemical, and spiritual aspect as well. And I'll explain each category in just a minute. Let's begin with understanding the psychological and emotional impact of narcissistic abuse. And for us to really understand this, we need to look at the human brain. On a very general and surface level, the human brain can be divided into three layers. The upper layer, which is the cortex and prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that is responsible for creativity, rational thinking, and logical decision making. And then there is this midbrain, where lies the limbic system. This area is responsible for bonding, reward perception, and so on. And then the last part of the brain is the reptilian brain, or the lower brain. And this part is responsible for temperature regulation, threat response, and the activation of survival mode. Now that you have this understanding, we need to zoom in a little bit and look into the dynamics of a narcissistic relationship. A narcissistic relationship is recognized by continuous unpredictability. What I mean by that is, you do not know what to expect from the narcissist in the next moment. Because of their shape-shifting nature, you do not know who they are for real. They keep changing their masks depending on what the situation needs and demands. And because of this unpredictability in the relationship, you stay in the constant state of arousal. What I mean by that is, your nervous system is dysregulated almost all of the time, and you are in a survival state. Our human body, is made to stay in a regulated state most of the time, not otherwise. But what happens in such a relationship is quite the opposite of what is supposed to happen. And when you are in such a dysregulated state, the sympathetic nervous system, that is a part of autonomic nervous system, gets activated and it stays dominant. When it is dominant, what happens in our brain is that the cortical regions, that is this upper region that is responsible for rational thinking, the logical understanding of the things and being in the present moment, it is switched off, and the blood flow is sent more to the mid and the lower part of our brain. And this is where we lose the sense of time. We act out of reactivity and survival responses, such as fight, flight, freeze, or fight, that you are aware of. What happens is that we are made to act, we are made to respond through survival responses, occasionally. It doesn't have to happen almost every single moment of the day. But what ends up happening is that we keep acting, reacting, functioning through this part of our nervous system and brain almost each and every minute that passes of the day while we are with a narcissist. The main drivers of this constant state of hypervigilance and walking on eggshells or the constant manipulation from the narcissist, belittling, demoralization, slow abuse that is hard to recognize, the shape-shifting behavior, as I just explained that in a couple of minutes before, and all of the things that you are aware of that happen in the narcissistic relationship. What is more important for us to understand is that as all of this keeps happening and it lasts for months or years on a go, it does something called chronic traumatization to our system. That's why I call, in my opinion, a narcissist is the stealer of resources. Whatever resources, the resilience that you had before, the skills to survive, the narcissist slowly breaks them down and breaks your personality. And as that happens, you start feeling helpless in the situation. Looking at the brain again, because of this constant and chronic stress, there are some alterations that happen in our brain. And these alterations happen in the main areas such as the cortex that I was talking about, the limbic system, the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the alterations manifest as the differences in the perception of threat. I'll explain what that means. The perception of reward and punishment, the perception of bonding, the perception of the alteration in the consciousness as well. These alterations that happen in our brain change the way we perceive threat. It changes the way we perceive the bonding that we have with a narcissist or with others. It changes the way we perceive reward. I'll explain that in a moment. It changes the way we feel feelings, that is the perception of the sensory experiences in the body. What I am trying to say is that these alterations are caused because of the brain damage due to the constant arousal and due to the prevalence of constant state of stress. Let's break the change in perception one by one and let's understand what happens and how it manifests in our behavior. When it comes to the change in the perception of threat, what ends up happening is that we perceive threat even when there is no threat. What I mean by that is that we get startled, we get triggered easily by the things that other people do not get triggered by. It could be someone talking a certain way, someone's tonality, someone's body language, or some certain sound, certain smell. Those kind of things start becoming triggers for us. And more so it happens in the relational context, and I'll be coming to that towards the end of this episode. So that is the perception, the change in the perception of threat. The second is the change in perception of reward and punishment. What ends up happening because of the narcissist's constant inconsistency, that is the unpredictability in their nature. At one time, they would be treating you so well, and the next moment you'll be treated as if you don't even exist. This inconsistency in connection and withdrawal, connection and discard creates a neural pathway, rewires the way we perceive reward, connection, bonding, and punishment. What ends up happening is that the narcissist degrades, or the brain damage happens to the extent that the narcissist's small actions that are non-significant or insignificant start becoming very important for us, or they start looking big enough for us to stay in the relationship. Let me give you an example for that. A narcissist slowly degrades you to the extent, keeps away, withdraws, withholds affection to the extent that a simple emoji can become a way of regulating for you. Like a narcissist can be completely withdrawing you, giving you silent treatment, stonewalling you, and the change that happens in our brain it becomes so dominant, and the perception change happens in a way that the smiley that would mean nothing to another person would mean everything to you. And it would make you feel, okay, yes, I am connected with them. You would still feel the connection. You would feel the rush in the body. This is what happens in such a relationship because of the dynamics that our perception of the bonding, reward, and punishment changes. Talking about brain damage, we also experience difficulty in consciousness. Most of the people that I work with, or even myself, I had this one thing that I would ruminate all the time about the things that happened in the past. And rumination is a trauma response. Because of this shutting down of prefrontal cortex or the cortical area, what is activated is the limbic system and the lower reptilian brain. And all we are thinking about is survival. And when we think about survival, all the other basic functions such as appetite, eating, sleep, they are thrown in the garbage. Like the system assumes that none of it is important. What is important is the survival in the given moment. And when it comes to the survival, your mind, your brain is working 24/7 trying to resolve the things that it feels it is stuck in, which is why the change in the consciousness also manifests as ruminative obsessive thought pattern all the time. And the other manifestations of this brain damage and the alteration in our brain and the things that happen in our brain show up as trauma bonding and cognitive dissonance. Even though our hormonal levels and hormonal imbalance also plays a role in the sustenance of a trauma bond and maintenance of cognitive dissonance, but what happens in the brain also plays a big role. And in fact, in a moment I'll be explaining how the hormonal imbalance plays a role in what happens to our brain and how all of the systematic processes that we experience, the adaptive responses that we go through in such a relationship, how they are all interconnected. Before I move to the second aspect that is influenced, that is impacted by the narcissistic abuse trauma, I just wanted to let you know that I'm doing a live workshop, a 3-hour workshop on how to heal for real after narcissistic abuse on August 28th and August 29th. On August 28th, it would start at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time, and August 29th, it would start at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time. If you really would like to know how to recover from all of this damage, I'll be dropping the link to booking the seats in the description below or in the link in bio. The booking is available at a very special price for just the next 12 hours. Make sure that you book your seat and really understand the process of recovery. Now let's talk about the physical and the biochemical changes that we experience. When we're talking about the biochemical changes, the hormonal imbalances that happen in our body, we're talking about the imbalances in the levels of stress hormones like cortisol, adrenaline, noradrenaline, and thyroid stimulating hormone, cortisol releasing hormone, and all the other hormones that are related with the adaptation to a stressor, to the stress that we experience. Because of the constant state of arousal, our body releases these hormones at a very high level, in a very high amount, and this keeps happening for a long time. It's like we are trying to run a car, the engine of the car, at the speed of 100 miles per hour, and it's not just happening for minutes or hours, it just keeps happening for days. What would happen to the engine of this car? Ultimately, it would exhaust. And that is what happens to our body because of this constant state of arousal and this imbalance in hormones. The changes that happen to our body are very damaging and drastic. Many of us as survivors, we experience or we have autoimmune disorders. I myself had fibromyalgia and chronic irritable bowel syndrome for years. And we have inflammation, we have nerve pain, we have so many conditions that are directly related with the kind and the amount of stress that we experience in a traumatic environment such as narcissistic abuse. And this imbalance of hormones also affects the brain structures. It causes the inflammation of amygdala that is again related with the alarm that switches on and off in our body when we are triggered. It is related and associated with the size of the hippocampus, which is again connected with the short-term memory loss or being able to remember things. Many survivors would come across and complain that I cannot remember things clearly, or I cannot even concentrate or read a page from a book because of the changes that happen in our body and brain. It manifests physically in our behaviors, in our ways of functioning, and it is a big loss when it comes to grieving the loss after narcissistic abuse, because we lose not only our mental health but our physical health as well. Coming to the third aspect, that is the spiritual changes, the changes in how we see God, how we see the connection, the greater connection with people, with universe. We feel the sense of hopelessness, the loss of meaning, the loss of trust in the greater good, the loss of the trust in good, in humanity overall. We lose the ability to believe that there is something bigger than us, there is something that decides or governs our fate, because ultimately survivors feel that it was a betrayal by God himself or itself. They question, and people question me, that if God is all loving, all caring, why would he, or why would it put me in a situation like this? Why didn't it save me? This is also what we experience as a damage to the soul, that we lose the trust in the greater good. Some of the people do not, but most of the people lose this capability of trusting in God, in universe, and the goodness overall in humanity. And that impacts our capability to trust others and even trust ourselves, our decision-making capability. And that is where the relational trauma comes into the picture. We lose the ability to form deeper connections with the people. We lose the capacity to connect at an emotional level where we can be fully vulnerable with this other person, open. We're always looking for something that they would do, they could do in their actions, and then that becomes an indicator for us to move back and take a step back. And that is where avoidance and the failed relationships comes into the picture. It doesn't only apply to the romantic relationships, but it could be applied to the concept of relationships overall. We fail as narcissistic abuse survivors. We fail to form, sustain, and maintain healthy and deep relationships. And that is why it is very important to understand that when it comes to the healing process, the pill dispensary attitude is not going to fix it. Granted that yes, medication would be helpful. It is helpful in many cases to just manage the symptoms, but that is not going to fix it. Why am I saying it? One, I have tried it myself. I see people asking me, should I be taking medication? Should I be doing this? Of course, this is beyond my expertise to guide you or advise you on that subject matter, but what I'm trying to say here is that that is not going to be enough. If you are on medication, it's not going to fix you, because the problem is not the symptom in itself. The problem is something else, and a pill cannot fix that. The healing process, the approach to recovery has to be salutogenic. The approach has to be holistic. The approach has to be integrative. That is, it has to involve all of these aspects that I was talking about: physical, emotional, spiritual, biochemical, relational, and healing has to happen on all of those levels. And that also explains the reason why therapeutic modalities such as EMDR, CBT, hypnosis, this, that, and the other are not going to fix the problem as well, because they on their own are just facilitators of the healing process. They are just the elements of the whole, and it's the integration and inclusion of diverse modalities that help you to focus on healing at multiple levels. That should be the goal. That should be the objective of healing process that you go through after narcissistic abuse. And that is what I'll be guiding you through in the workshop that I'll be doing on August 28th and 29th, to help you understand how the healing process can look like and what you should be focusing on. I'll be sharing a lot of tools that I've used myself and I help my clients to use to just heal at the deepest level possible. I really look forward to seeing you there as well, and thank you so much for staying with me this long. I'll talk with you very soon. Till then, let the healing begin.